This is a special report from Hoosier Ag Today's Eric Pfeiffer.
Welcome into Hat Studio 3A in West Lafayette. I'm Eric Pfeiffer from Hoosier Ag Today, and I'm joined now by Bryce Doeschot. He's a buddy of mine out in Nebraska, KRVN Radio and the Rural Radio Network. And obviously, Bryce, it's been kind of devastating out your way with all of the flooding that's taken place. Reports out just yesterday that 55% of the corn crop in the U.S. and maybe 60% of the soybean crop is at risk of flooding, a lot of that coming from your neck of the woods. Just kind of take us through here. How bad is it on the ground out there in Nebraska?
Well, I'll say it's getting better than it was at first. That's for sure, Eric, because right away what we saw was widespread flooding along the majority of our rivers in central and eastern Nebraska. Of course, eastern Nebraska kind of saw the worst of it, but across the whole state, we had some serious natural disasters going on with a blizzard, especially out in the Panhandle, to flooding, and then again in central and eastern Nebraska. But when it happened, people who have never seen flooding in their area saw flooding, and it's absolutely being labeled as historic so far. So it gives you an idea of just how widespread this has been. And like I said, it is getting better right now. People are assessing damages. A lot of infrastructure has been damaged. We've seen the headlines, like you said, of flooding is expected through the spring. So could be a long spring for a lot of these producers.
Let's talk about some of that infrastructure. I saw on your social media you were at a meeting the other day, I believe, with Nebraska Governor Ricketts, talking about some of that infrastructure. And it seems as though progress is being made, especially on some of the roads there in Nebraska. If you've seen some of the pictures and videos on social media, you've seen many of those bridges just completely flooded out. But that is getting better, and some of that water is beginning to recede at this point, right?
Yeah, but what we're seeing after that is gravel roads, 6 foot deep, that the water has taken out and just absolutely destroyed some of those bottom roads. Give you an idea, at one point across the state of Nebraska alone, 2,000 miles of roadways were closed. That would be the state roads, not necessarily the county ones. And now that number, thankfully, is down to 200 that they're currently trying to repair as of earlier this week. So from 2,000 to 200, the folks are out there working hard. But you're right, 14 state bridges were closed and have significant damage, 11 of which the bridge is completely gone. So that is significant, and those are state, does not include some of those counties. And those counties, you think about, they have to fund that. They're having meetings currently of how are we going to repair this infrastructure, and we don't have the income to do so.
Again, I'm with Bryce Doeschot with KRVN Radio and the Rural Radio Network in Nebraska. And Bryce, let's talk about some of the relief efforts. It seems as though, people are coming out of the woodworks here, seeing those videos on social media and trying to figure out how they can best help. I know here at Hoosier Ag Today, we've been promoting Nebraska Farm Bureau's relief efforts. I know there are others. At this point, talk about the outpouring of support from not just other Nebraskans, but from everyone around the country, and really what it is they're looking for now as we're a couple of weeks outside from that initial flooding.
Well, let me say thank you to those who have been doing that outpouring of support. I know all of Nebraska appreciates that, and social media helps us see that completely with the hay donations of fellow ranchers and farmers across the nation. Those have been we've been able to see that and certainly appreciate that. You mentioned the relief fund set up. I know the Farm Bureau, talked to them earlier in the week. They're over $500,000 they've raised in cash. So the Farm Bureau has a relief fund set up. The cattlemen do as well. And kind of a unique one, the Nebraska FFA Foundation has also set up a relief. Was talking with an FFA chapter advisor who said 3 or 4 of her students had their supervised agricultural experiences just washed away in the flooding. So a lot of folks from Nebraska are trying to help out, but across the nation, you're right, we have seen an outpouring of support with hay donations as well as cash from literally all across the world once this is making those headlines. In terms of the response, though, we've seen locally people like the Nebraska National Guard. I don't know if you saw some of those videos, but they were doing hay drops because cattlemen and cattlewomen couldn't get to their cattle that were along some of the bottoms. So the National Guard was dropping hay out of the back of a Chinook helicopter. So it's been neat, I will say, to see how folks are coming together to solve some of these challenges that they're seeing.
And let's talk about those cattlemen and that cattle. We've seen reports out this way of just absolute devastating numbers. I think some may have been over-reported at one point. I think I heard 750,000 head. Now that's back to kind of way down to 100. Where are we actually at on the number of cattle lost out there? Is there a way to really put a number on it at this point?
Well, you're right. I think we've seen some different reporting going on and maybe some missed numbers out there. I will say what we're hearing here right now is we don't know. Folks, for the federal assistance, the Nebraska Department of Agriculture put out some initial estimates, Eric. And so that initial estimate was $400 million in livestock losses. So $400 million in livestock as well as $440 million in crop losses. So nearly $1 billion there alone in agriculture. I think we're going to see that number increase as folks are not able to plant their fields this spring and have to look at some alternative options. But especially in the livestock, we don't know, and it's tough to be able to tell right now. But folks are going through the phase of applying for some help through programs like the Livestock Indemnity Program.
And again, as far as relief efforts are concerned, going back to that here for a moment, right now, what is needed most? Is it the cash through these organizations? Is it hay that's still needed? What's needed most on the ground? Again, we're looking at potential flooding here in your area through the end of May.
I would say at this point, although all those donations that are kind of physical have been very generous, and I know a lot of the folks on the ground appreciate that, those hay donations, but probably the easiest way and probably the most effective at this point is some of those cash donations through those organizations I mentioned, whether it's the Nebraska Farm Bureau, Nebraska Cattlemen, or the folks like the Red Cross. They're the ones who can get that money where it's most needed on the local ground. So although we do certainly appreciate those physical ones, that hay, the fencing supplies, the cash is probably the most effective.
Again, Bryce Doeschot, he's a fellow farm broadcaster, part of the National Association of Farm Broadcasters. That's where Bryce and I met. And he's at KRVN Radio and the Rural Radio Network there in Nebraska, reporting to us from Lincoln there at the University of Nebraska. Bryce, thank you so much, and please know that the thoughts and prayers of all of us here in Indiana are out there with you guys. We continue to think about your farmers and ranchers out there, and please do let them know that.
Thank you, Eric. Appreciate you taking the time to spread the word about what's going on in Nebraska. We sure appreciate that.
Again, my thanks to Bryce Doeschot from KRVN and the Rural Radio Network in Nebraska. If you want to give, you can find those resources at HoosierAgToday.com. They're there. We'll make sure that we keep them out there while we keep the farmers and ranchers of Nebraska in our thoughts and prayers. With this special report, I'm Eric Pfeiffer, Hoosier Ag Today, Indiana's leading farm network.